So surrender is a term that you probably only know you've done it if you've done it. Nobody can judge it from the outside.
How many adults do you think walk around the face of this earth not trusting anybody?
That God gets angry just like we do, but God doesn't give vent to it. God doesn't take it out on us.
The spiritual path has been the hardest path for man to follow ever since man realized there was such a thing.
This program is the third in a series of 12 self-revealing conversations between George Mann and Dick Rice. They have walked the 12 steps of AA to experience greater wholeness and invite you to walk and reflect with them as they share personal stories, insights from Scripture, and some of their individual spiritual growth experiences. Dr. George Mann is the Medical Director of St. Mary's Chemical Dependency Services in Minneapolis. Father Dick Rice is the Director of Loyola's Spiritual Direction Center in St. Paul, Minnesota.
George, I would like to anticipate the third step with a reading from Luke's Gospel that for me is a real third step moment in the New Testament. Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching humans." With that, they brought their boats to land, left everything, and became his followers.
The third step is a difficult step. It's a profound step. It talks about some of the basic turns our life has to take if we look towards spiritual growth and development. The third step says, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him.
When I came into this third step, I had to realize how willful I had been, and that one of the reasons that I was in such need of the steps at all was that I had been so willful. I'd like to appear maybe kind of docile and subservient to the Lord, but I knew exactly how I wanted things and how I wanted them right now. And so that it would be my will and that I would have to choose to hand my will over to God was just a very humbling act for me.
I think there are a lot of people who walk around the face of this earth who have and do turn their lives over to God in the sense that they live within the law. They live within the law of the land, they live within the law of their church, they live within the 10 Commandments. If you look at them externally, yes, their lives are turned over to God. But as you indicate, turning your will over to the care of God, where you know, as Jesus says, not my will, but thine. It's not the externals, it's not how I act, it's what I decide to do or not to do, but what goes on the inside of me. How much do I resist? How much do I really accept that care and that love that, that Jesus talks about and the Father that He describes to us?
Over to the care of God, and the care of God as we understood Him. The amount of trust that is asked for in that is, well, at times it just seems way beyond what I'm capable of.
There's another word that I think we need to introduce into our understanding of this step at this time, and that is the word surrender. Surrender implies a totally different attitude than to make a decision to turn my life and my will. Surrender has about it the sense of having accomplished it. If I have surrendered, if I'm willing to surrender, what that means is that the ego attachments that I have had, that I'm in the process of working through, the false gods that I've worshipped, the idols that I've held dear to me, the love affair that I've had with alcohol, drugs, money, power, sex, whatever those things may be, I'm ready to walk away from and truly surrender to the will and to the care of God.
But look at what you've done. I mean, it's about the most countercultural term you could have chosen. Everything in our culture is to win, to accomplish, to gain, to be victorious. And you're saying, I have to admit that I have been defeated and totally give myself over to the victor. And to trust that one as victor and that he won't completely vanquish me, that's very, very difficult, of course. I'm also fascinated at the ease with which I can blur surrender and confuse it with compliance.
Right.
Becoming the good little boy, doing whatever I have to do as long as I have to do it to get finally what I want, which might be to be right back where I was. So surrender is a term that you probably only know you've done it if you've done it. Nobody can judge it from the outside.
Except I think there are some examples. I think of Abraham and Isaac, where I think if there's ever a way of externally judging one's behavior, the willingness of Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. It looks to me as if surrender really had occurred in that man. I think it's a marvelously classical example of what surrender is all about. I think that one of the most difficult things for us, and one of the things that keeps the decision that we have to make to turn our lives and will over, the surrender of that to God, is the things that you talked about before that are so tied up with being human. The need to win, the need to look good, the need to be right, in quotations, the need to be accepted in our society. The spiritual path has been the hardest path for man to follow ever since man realized there was such a thing. And I think that the reason that the path is so difficult is because we almost literally have to give up some of the things that we hold so dearly. I think that some of the psychiatrists of note have talked about things like self-preservation and things as being basic drives. I think far more basic are some of the things you and I are talking about today. The abandonment of self, the abandonment of ego, the giving up our false gods, the giving up of our delusions. Those are terribly critical issues.
Yes, and they all get tied in with that care of God as we understood him. I live a lot of my life out of the 3rd chapter of Genesis, where there we were in the garden, having done what we did, having sinned, having said, I want it and I want it all right now, and then God comes upon us, and we're scared to death. We separate from one another, we cover ourselves, and we cover ourselves with a lot of these needs to look good. And what are we so afraid of? We're afraid that if God comes upon us, he'll be furious. And if only we had stayed hand in hand in the garden and not covered ourselves and not separated, because God wasn't going to condemn us when he came upon us in the cool of the night. In a way, our whole task is to get back into the garden.
It's not so much getting back into the garden, it's almost going beyond the garden, because what we have done quite successfully throughout our history is we have anthropomorphized God. We try to make God the man who lives in the next village, the person who is very much like me, who is short-tempered, who is punishing, who is vengeful, who can be jealous, who can be loving, who can be kind. We have given God, the creator of all of this, all these human characteristics. And so when we move into some of the attitudes that you're talking about working hard to please him, being afraid of him, truly, if that's what God is, then those kinds of fears would be normal kinds of fears. And I think that as we process through the steps, one of the key words in this, as we understand him, as we understand that those feet of clay that we give our Creator in pulling God into human limitations are some of the things that prevent us from really accepting God. Obviously, Jesus did not have that problem. He recognized the Father for what the Father is in a way that is the step behind or beyond the garden.
And yet that very giving of God, the human manifestations, we've been invited to. It's part and parcel of our spirituality. The Spirit leads us, I think, to go both ways. If we're made in the image and likeness of God, then to just anthropomorphize God is very understandable. God is, to a large extent, in our image and likeness. But God is also totally other than us. And there's no way that he's more insistent on bringing that home, it seems to me, than right in this area, the care of God, the unconditional love of God. It's hinted at one moment in the Old Testament. As you spoke, I was reminded of the 11th chapter of Hosea. God says, through Hosea, I will not give vent to my blazing anger. I will not destroy Ephraim again. I am God and not human. The way that God is different from us is that God gets angry just like we do, but God doesn't give vent to it. God doesn't take it out on us. God continues to love us even through the anger that he might have at some of our specific acts. So it is a care of God that is day in and day out, whether we've been good or we've been bad.
I reflect on that little marvelous scenario of the prophet bargaining with God about Sodom. If you find 50 good people, will you not destroy the city? Well, no, I won't destroy it if there are 50. Well, if you find 40, if you find 30, all the way down, if you find 5, will you not destroy the city? And there God keeps reflecting what you're just talking about.
There's nothing Jesus wants to make more clear than the love of God for us through every event, the care of God lived out in history. When Jesus, very close to Jerusalem, in the 15th chapter of Luke, says finally, well, who is God? Well, God is this dirty old shepherd who even takes responsibility for our getting lost. Loses a sheep, and he risks all the others and just leaves them and goes out in search of that one that was lost. I think the boys from Yale got it right, much healthier than I often do. We're poor little sheep that go astray, and yet the care of God is always there, going out to us, bringing us back into the flock.
I think one of the implications of this step, and that is that if we take this step, if I make the decision to turn my life and my will over to the care of God, that implies forgiveness. I am forgiven. And I think one of the great obstacles that people have in taking the third step is that their belief that what they have done, the mistakes they have made, the sins they have committed, the behaviors that they have gotten into are so horrendous that they are unforgivable and therefore precludes the third step. We as, going back to our human characteristics, is that, all of us can forgive each other far more than we can forgive ourselves. The understanding and the belief and the acceptance that I can be forgiven by this accepting God is a critical point. I think that when you have people coming out of years of struggling with alcoholism, and all the problems and all the terrible things, all the tragedies, all the destructive behaviors they have gotten into, where they have got to the point where they thoroughly believe that they are pariahs, lepers, unforgivable. And then along come the 12 steps and say, there is a God who will forgive you if you make the decision to turn your life and your will over to God. That is waiting. That is there for you.
And it's compounded, isn't it, for so many of those people, because they know people in their lives who will not forgive them. The daughter who won't forgive her salesman father for night after night being out on the road and being drunk and not being there for her. And he knows she won't forgive him. But he has to be sat down and realized it's not all black and white. He'd love everybody to have forgiven him. So the care of God is not to be confused with the care of everyone that you'd love to have fully forgive and accept you. Some won't. But for all of that, isn't the love of God there continually for you, often enough played out in the lives of those people who will forgive you?
I think one of the amazing things that people experience in the 12-step program is the amount of forgiveness that is present and available at the human level. When I see families that are interacting where one of the parents is coming out of years of alcoholism or drug addiction, and these children sit around and tell the parents how much they love them and how willing they are to forgive them. It's an unbelievable event for those parents that could be happening. And again, I think it's those kinds of experiences that really deepen our understanding of God.
Of God and of the care of God.
Right. I think as time moves on, as I said earlier, how the third step is taken gathers depth as time goes on. And as people have more of those kinds of experiences of forgiveness, reconciliation, the moving out of resentments and grievances that have been there for a long time, those are the things that enable people to understand God, to understand this step, and about what it is to turn your life and your will over to the care of God.
To turn it over, and to quite daily turn it over. One of the things that continues to intrigue me is, how does an adult grow in trust, and that entrusting your will and your life over to God? I agree with what Eric Erickson says, that trust as the first struggle of the child's life is pretty well resolved on the basis of the continuity of care that there has been by the significant parent, especially the mother. Well, what if that care wasn't there, as it wasn't there for all of us to some extent? How does an adult who is more or less trusting and more or less suspicious grow in greater trust, become more trusting? And it seems to me that the only way an adult can grow in it is to continually give one's will and life over. It's that continuity of care now lived out as an adult. I have to daily entrust myself to God. I have to daily choose to do that, and then see if He's there and how God is there.
How many adults do you think walk around the face of this earth not trusting anybody?
Oh, everyone would have to trust someone to some extent, but there's a lot more suspicion and a lot more people living quite covered up lives than at first glance I'd like to say. How do you think? How would you answer that?
I think the lack of trust or mistrust of others is one of the very common hurdles that most of us have to face. My experience is that you have people in counseling and say, well, would you share this with your husband or your wife or your mother or your father? And it surprises me how often is, no, I wouldn't. No, I would not share this with them. The next question is, well, why wouldn't you share it with them? Well, however the words come out, the answer is, because I would be rejected by them. either totally or in some limited way, and the fear and the unwillingness to accept that rejection. Then we move into an area like this, that if I can't trust the parent I know, then how would I trust the God I don't know?
And yet so often, covered with shame as they are, you could sit there with them and say, no way will they be rejected. They're not often enough when that becomes uncovered, whatever that might be.
But that's the perception, that's the understanding, that's the belief as people walk into it, which keeps people locked up, keeps us in our own little separate boxes. In some of the readings around the steps, one of the readings says that if we do not share our defects, if we do not share our problems, our behavioral deficits, the kind of behaviors that have been so destructive, if we don't share them and share them very specifically, then we have not dealt with them.
Sure, you're previewing the walk we still have to take.
That's right.
But showing us again the process that we're in with the steps. So it basically would take the full revelation of myself to another and the acceptance of that other, that spirited, God-given individual who knows everything about me and still loves me, to get me through this step, probably entrusting my life over to God, as well as I've done to this individual.
The problem is that the steps say you put the cart before the horse, and that is your understanding of who God is and the acceptance of God and the acceptance of the total forgiveness of God, that you are able to, you have enough trust, enough courage, enough fortitude to turn your life over to the care of God before you're willing to turn your life over to the care of people, if you take the steps in their sequence.
And Jesus keeps saying, and who is that God? Well, that God, like the shepherd going on in the 15th chapter of Luke, that God's a little old woman who's got these very dear coins, you and I, in her hair. She loses one, and yet she does everything she can to find it, sweeps diligently, finds it, then throws a party that's worth much more than you and I are worth. If there's anything Jesus tries to encourage us to, it's to entrust ourselves to that God that he so knew and understood and had to entrust himself to. Well, I think you've gotten us ready for the fourth step, my friend.